Hey, everybody. So, yesterday in Brussels, the European Union stepped up and announced 883.6 million euros, call it $1 billion, for something called the Team Gaza Initiative. 65 delegations from all different countries were all in the room. Jared Kushner was on the phone. Uh, the Palestinian prime minister was co-chairing. There were handshakes. There was a family photo. The whole production. But here's what wasn't in the room at that conference in Brussels. No one who actually controls what's going on in Gaza. Israel was not there, and Hamas actually controls Gaza wherever the population lives, which is presumably where you would be doing reconstruction. Anyway, the people that are supposed to replace Hamas, the body that is supposed to replace Hamas, the one that actually is named in Trump's peace plan, the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, they had a person there, but they're not even in Gaza. They are still sitting in Egypt. They have not deployed yet. So before we get into it, here's where this video is going. I'm going to tell you the punchline right now. Everybody in that room in Brussels yesterday was negotiating over a Gaza that on the ground does not actually exist. Now, there's no vacuum to fill here. Hamas is still holding their ground. They are still in charge. They still have weapons. They're still controlling things. What's actually up for grabs is the money and the political future of Gaza, maybe at some point. And that's what the Palestinian Authority is maneuvering to get its hands on. By paperwork rather than by guns, I guess you could say. And at a time when they're not supposed to be doing this, meaning ahead of schedule, you could say. We'll get into all of this. So that's what this video is about. So stick around. There's a lot here. So first of all, Hamas still runs Gaza. They are running the police. They are rebuilding the administrative structures. They still control who gets food and who doesn't. And that is not a side detail. That's the single most powerful lever of control over this population, over a population in a situation that they're in. Whoever controls the aid that comes in controls everything. And Hamas is making sure that they control it. And I don't want this to just be an abstract talking point. Like, yeah, Hamas controls the aid. Because here's what's amazing. The exact same day that this conference was going on in Brussels, we have this headline. Check this out. Right here. UN official says Hamas obstructing aid in Gaza. This is quite literally the same day as they're sitting in Brussels. And look what it says in the article. Let's take a look. A United Nations official has said Palestinian militant group Hamas was disrupting aid distribution in the Gaza Strip, placing further hardship on its civilians already grappling with the humanitarian crisis in the war-shattered enclave. In a statement late on Sunday, the UN's humanitarian coordinator for Palestinian territories said humanitarian workers had to halt activity after armed men entered a food distribution point in northern Gaza and assaulted two truck drivers in a World Food Program warehouse. They assaulted them. These incidents are not isolated. They're completely unacceptable and reflect an increasingly dangerous pattern of intimidation, violence, and obstruction, including smuggling attempts, targeting, and abusing humanitarian operations, said UN Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Ramiz Alakbarov. Quote, they are placing humanitarian workers at risk, disrupting the delivery of life-saving assistance, and further constraining the ability of humanitarian organizations to operate at a time when civilians across Gaza continue to face immense and pressing humanitarian conditions. Alakbarov said, I heard a report that it had something to do with Hamas not getting their share of the aid in this particular time, and they came in to rough up the humanitarian aid workers from the World Food Program. Hamas asserting their authority. This story broke. The incident happened the day before, but this story broke the same day in Reuters, and it was also in the New York Times. It was all over the place, the same day as their meeting in Brussels. Okay, so what's Hamas's response? also on yesterday. They didn't deny that they did it at all. They actually said that it wasn't a raid or an attack or an obstruction. They claimed it was law enforcement. Okay, so picture the split screen right now. In one frame, we have this ballroom in Brussels with 65 delegations, Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner is on the phone. Jared Kushner joins EU Gaza donor meeting, so he's part of it. So it has the veneer of being part of being approved by the Trump administration. There's $1 billion pledged for Gaza's recovery. And in the other frame, in this split screen, on the same day, we have Hamas police in a World Food Program warehouse in Jabalia beating up aid workers, halting humanitarian operations. And did anyone in Brussels mention what was going on in Gaza the day before? Now, under Trump's 20-point plan, Hamas running Gaza's food distribution is... here's Trump's 20-point plan. Under that plan, they're not supposed to be doing that anymore. The plan actually names a body to administer Gaza during this transition. It's called the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, a technocratic committee that's supposed to take over exactly the functions that Hamas is still performing. And the chief commissioner of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, a guy by the name of Ali Sha'ath, he was in Brussels yesterday. So he was there. He shook all the hands. But what about his committee? The National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. It hasn't entered Gaza yet. It's still sitting in Egypt because Hamas is still in control. So the one body that's supposed to be the alternative to Hamas, the actual governing mechanism the peace plan calls for, exists on paper and in press releases, but not on the ground. Meanwhile, the people actually on the ground controlling the food and the law enforcement and everything else are the same organization that did October 7th, and as of this Monday is still assaulting aid workers trying to feed the population. Now, one honest caveat, because precision matters, Israeli troops are still physically controlling more than 60, maybe or 70% of Gaza, including every access point in and out. So saying Hamas runs Gaza is not the same as Hamas holds all of Gaza, but we're talking about where civilians live and where aid is distributed. And because if we're talking about reconstruction and rehabilitation of Gaza and governance, that's what we're talking about. So Hamas is the armed authority on the ground. That's what matters. That's why I'm saying Hamas still runs Gaza. Because you can't build new governance, obviously if Hamas is there. You can't fund recovery if Hamas is there. No one is going to be investing in that. None of it's going to happen. If Israel is still fighting Hamas because Hamas is still planning attacks and trying to rearm and everything else, then no one's going to rebuild that. A prerequisite for any recovery is getting rid of Hamas. We all know this. So, and everyone knows this. Everyone serious knows this, and still they're sitting in Brussels and they're having this conversation. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because there's a second story running underneath the first one, and it's just as important. And I mentioned this in my opening. Before we go on to this second story, let me just remind you about a very important event that we are hosting. And we're going to be hosting on Monday, this coming Monday, July 20th, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 8 p.m. in Israel. Are we headed for regime change? What to expect from the Middle East? A fantastic webinar symposium that we are hosting. And if you can't make the time, don't worry about it. If you register for this webinar, then whether you make it to the webinar or not to experience it live, and it will be live, you will get an email with the full webinar after it airs. Okay, but you'll only get that email if you register. So whether you can make the time or not, you don't want to miss this. And our panel is incredible. It's Brigadier General Amir Avivi, founder of the Israel Defense and Security Forum, Brian Kennedy, president of the American Strategy Group and former president of the Claremont Institute, Dr. David Wormser, who you should all be familiar with by now, a senior analyst on the Middle East for the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C., one of the greatest minds on the Middle East, and Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, who is from the Foundation for Defense of Democracy and also former IDF spokesman. It's going to be an incredible webinar. You can sign up by clicking the link in the description of this video, which is Israel365 israeltv.com/regime, or you can click this QR code and that'll take you through, or you could go to the Israel 365 Action website. There should be a link up there. I told them to put one up there. I hope it's there. Okay. So you don't want to miss that. So let's get back to our second narrative that's going on. Along with what's going on, you have this group in Brussels, you have what's happening in Gaza with Hamas, and the Trump plan. So let's go back to the Trump plan. The Trump plan doesn't just say that Hamas has to go. It has a very specific clause, clause 9, that I want to look at with you, which is about who controls the money that comes in for the rehabilitation and reconstruction and the governance of Gaza in the meantime, in the transition period. Okay, here's the actual language of clause 9 of the 20-point plan. Gaza will be governed under the temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee. That's what we're referring to, this national committee that is sitting in Egypt, responsible for delivering the day-to-day running of public services and municipalities for the people of Gaza. This committee will be made up of qualified Palestinians and international experts with oversight and supervision by a new international transitional body, the Board of Peace, which will be headed and chaired by President Donald J. Trump, with other members and heads of state to be announced, including former Prime Minister Tony Blair. That never happened. This body will set the framework and handle the funding. This body will set the framework and handle the funding for the redevelopment of Gaza until such time as the Palestinian Authority has completed its reform program, as outlined in various proposals, including President Trump's peace plan in 2020 and the Saudi-French proposal, which is from September of last year. So until the Palestinian Authority has completed its reform program, as outlined in these other proposals, and can securely and effectively take back control of Gaza. This body will call on the best international standards to create modern and efficient governance that serves the people of Gaza and is conducive to attracting investment. Okay, that is the clause. So now, with that in mind, look at what it says. Funding authority belongs to the Board of Peace, not the Palestinian Authority. And the Palestinian Authority doesn't get back in until its reform program is complete. Not announced, not in progress, not under review. It has to be completed. So who co-chaired yesterday's donor conference? The donor conference for this Gaza thing that we're talking about, this event that took place in Brussels. Who was the co-chair of it? The Palestinian Authority's Prime Minister, Mohammed Mustafa. He's in the official family photo for Team Gaza launch. And on the margins of that same meeting, the EU signed off on 41.7 million euros in fresh funding to the Palestinian Authority directly through an old mechanism called PEGAS, or P-E-G-A-S-E. I don't know what it stands for. I'm not going to look it up. Now, I want you to understand what PEGAS actually is, because this is important. So PEGASE, PEGAS, whatever we want to call it, was created in 2008, specifically to keep money away from Hamas after Hamas seized Gaza in 2007, right? Because money was going to Palestinian areas before Hamas won the election in 2007. It would go to Gaza and Judea Samaria, known as the West Bank. Hamas takes over in 2007, and then they wanted to create this mechanism for money to flow into the Palestinian Authority, but not to Hamas. And that's what was created. It was built from day one to route funds around Gaza's ruling authority, not into it. It's a West Bank instrument, if you will. Right? It's never been a Gaza governance tool. But here's the PA showing up at the Gaza funding conference. That's what this meeting was. And they're in the family photo for the Gaza initiative. And meanwhile, they're also collecting a check for PEGAS on the same day. Okay. And the Palestinian Authority Prime Minister is the host of the meeting about Gaza. You see, according to what we just read in the in that 20-point plan for Gaza, the Palestinian Authority is not supposed to be at the table yet. But they're front and center, chairing it, right? They're Meanwhile, the clause 9 of the 20-point plan, which is what Israel agreed to, and the Board of Peace, National Council for Administration of Gaza, they were present, but the chair of the meeting was the Palestinian Authority, who's not supposed to be involved because they haven't reformed themselves yet. Now, there's one more detail that didn't make it into either of the two press accounts of this meeting. An EU official said on the record that the EU has doubts about the global scale of the Board of Peace, doubts about the global scale of it because its governance is subordinated to Trump. It names President Trump in that 20-point plan, in that clause. It names President Trump. In other words, what they were politely saying is, even inside the room, we're not actually sure who's supposed to be running this, because is it Trump's decision or is the Board of Peace independent? Is it global? Is it an American thing? Okay. Now, let's get back to the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority's whole case for having a piece of the pie with the Gaza situation is we've reformed. So let's test that against what's actually been verified. Okay. Claim number one, in terms of reform, like one of the big items, and we're going to deal with two big line items in terms of what they're supposed to reform. So one of them, big one, is pay for slay, right? That's the stipends that they pay to terrorists and their families. They claim that back in February, they stopped doing this. Maybe. The European Union's own internal review of that claim isn't due until the end of the summer. That's a separate outside audit from a firm called Alvarez and Marsal that they haven't published it yet. So there's zero basis to say that that claim is valid. So Mustafa himself, the prime minister, when asked about that, he didn't deny that now here's the thing. He didn't even deny that the payments continue, that they're still paying people. He just objected to calling it pay for slay. Instead, he described it as a social care system for the families of people who've been killed or locked away, so their families are struggling. It's a social care system. It's not paying terrorists. So he's not even claiming that they've changed anything. He's just trying to rebrand it. Now, the other claim, so on the pay for slay thing, again, the report hasn't been revealed yet. So there isn't even by their own claims, even if you believe they're nonsense, it's not verified yet until the report comes out, and the report hasn't come out. So they're not supposed to be part of this. If that sounds like nitpicking, so here's the other big reform. The other big reform that's always demanded of them is having elections. There hasn't been an election there in decades. So lo and behold, a couple of days ago, this is 4 days ago, Palestinian legislative elections set for November 28th. We have Palestinian elections. And this is being cited, including by Prime Minister Mustafa, as proof of genuine reform, of democratic legitimacy. But take a look at this. This is Al Jazeera's own reporting on that announcement. Their Ramallah correspondent didn't even Al Jazeera, they didn't even frame this as actual reform. She described it as is it a she? I don't even know who she is, who it is. It's described here. No, it's a he. It's a guy. He describes it here as a direct consequence of pressure from France, from Saudi Arabia, from powerful countries and it's explicitly tied to unlocking financial aid. In other words, even Al Jazeera is reporting the call for elections as simply an announcement made in order to unlock money. Okay, it's not a structural change. There hasn't been an election. It's not just that they canceled 1 or 2 elections. There hasn't been an election in 20 years. Okay, now, so even if we take the announcement of elections at face value, it runs into a wall that killed the last attempts at elections. There have been elections called over the last 20 years, meaning announced that there will be an election, but then they cancel them always before they even happen. The real reason they're canceling them is because Hamas would win every election, including the upcoming one. If they actually do this election and it's actually a free and fair election, it won't be called Hamas because they'll say for some reason that they can't run, but it'll be a Hamas ideology party. It'll be the same thing. So there's that problem. And then there's also the problem of East Jerusalem. Israel doesn't allow voting for the Palestinian Authority in East Jerusalem, for the East Jerusalem Arabs who want to vote in the Palestinian Authority. And the last election collapsed before it started because of that problem. Anyway, that's a separate issue. On top of that, Gaza itself, which is over 90% destroyed, nearly the entire population is displaced, doesn't have updated voter rolls. It's not currently in any physical condition to hold a normal election. And so suddenly now, after Abbas was elected, Mahmoud Abbas, the president, was elected to a 4-year term in 2005, 21 years ago, and he's got to have an election now, because he's being told he's supposed to have an election. But what do you do about the voting in Gaza? So an election announcement like this was timed to come a couple days before the donor conference, right? He announces the election on, Thursday? And then on Monday, there's the donor conference. Okay? That's what's going on here. So let's put the whole thing together now. On one side, you have the actual governance of Gaza. Police, food, administration. It's all still in the hands of Hamas. And on the very day the EU was pledging $1 billion for Gaza's recovery under this new administrative body that hasn't even entered Gaza, Hamas police were, the day before, Hamas police were in a World Food Program warehouse beating up aid workers. The body that the peace plan created to replace Hamas is not coming into the Gaza Strip anytime soon. Any talk of recovery or reconstruction that doesn't start with removing Hamas is a conversation about a country, about a situation that doesn't exist. And at the same time, we have the other claimant to the throne here, which is the Palestinian Authority, which wants to take over from Hamas. They're maneuvering their way to the front of the line, co-chairing the donor conference, standing in the family photo, collecting checks before it's met the one condition its own reform program requires: completion of a reform program. And I haven't even mentioned that they're supposed to change their textbooks. There's a whole bunch of things that they're supposed to reform to show that they've changed, that they're no longer hostile to Israel. So an unaudited claim about ending terror payments while saying that they're really just a social welfare program, and an election announcement that doesn't add up to completed reform program. Okay? It's just performance. It's just theater because of a donor conference. So these are the two grifts, the Hamas grift and the Palestinian Authority grift, running in parallel. Hamas holds Gaza by force. They execute their opponents. They terrorize the population. They're still as committed to their terrorist agenda as ever before. The Palestinian Authority, their grift, they don't hold any authority in Gaza whatsoever, and they're trying to elbow their way in through diplomacy and, paperwork, without actually changing, without actually reforming. And everyone in that room in Brussels is all like congratulating themselves and pledging amounts of money that are never going to come to be, because no one's ever going to give any money to something that doesn't exist. That's the situation. That's the situation with Gaza, with Hamas. There's more going on there, but I thought that this was a plot worth discussing. All right, folks. Make sure you register for that webinar. You don't want to miss it. And I'll see you in the next video. God bless.